Where should we be if nobody tried to find out what lies beyond? You never wanted to look beyond the clouds and the stars, or to know what causes the trees to bud, and what changes the darkness into light?
I want to cry inside a floating tear, and I'll ascend into a lovely atmosphere. I'll become a planet on my own, peacefully orbiting the earth. Oh, dear Lord, the way you cloud, and my little mind keeps on tearing me apart. I want to hide inside the Milky Way, and I'll relieve my worries in a nebulous birthplace. I'll become a universal light, illuminating hues of open skies. Oh, dear world, you're breaking me down. My little mind keeps on tearing me apart. Keeps tearing me apart. My little mind keeps on telling me it's fine.
If you would be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself for the podcast?
Hello there, this is Paul Masvidal, and you are listening to Dreams of Consciousness.
Listeners to the podcast will probably know you from your work with Cynic, Aeon Spoke, and Portal, which I've written about and talked about quite regularly for the last couple of years. How would you describe the music that you make?
Well, it depends on the project, but the current music with this acoustic-oriented work I'm doing is in the vein of, singer-songwriter with a little bit of an experimental quality to it, in that I incorporated these tones called isochronic tones, a type of auditory kind of therapy tool. But really, the roots of this material is rooted in what I was raised with in my childhood home. My mother being into a lot of late 60s and 70s folk music, among many of her tastes, because she was also into world music and stuff like that. But I grew up hearing Simon and Garfunkel and Neil Young and Bob Dylan and the Beatles. So I was always a fan of songwriting at a young age, and then I kind of bailed and went into a rebellious period of trying to be cooler than my brother, who was listening to classic rock, and that's where I got into metal, and in some ways let go of all my songwriting interests and got more obsessed with just extreme forms of music. But this stuff is in many ways like a post Aeon Spoke thing, in that it's returning to my roots and trying to do something really simple, and yet that ends up being the most difficult stuff to do, as you might know, with the background in art, and I think you went to Pratt or something. Is it your design
Yeah.
student?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so as an artist, it's like reduction has been like the story of my life, and I feel like I'm getting closer and closer to kind of understanding what that means and how to say something with a lot less. And so I was terrified to even do this work. This material has been ongoing for a while, but it finally got the nerve to put it out there. But yeah, it's so the current music, it's very I would say it's really kind of acoustic music with melodically, lyrically oriented singer-songwriter stuff with a twist, a little more sophisticated, maybe harmonically. I mean, I really, for me, they're heart songs, you know? They're really rooted in something super organic and raw and real. So that's kind of where I am now. I'm also in the background working on a new Cynic record, which is almost the other world. But that stuff comes very naturally for me as well, which is a progressive kind of experimental music, very complex and layered and dense and chromatic and equally fun, just a different brain, and almost more like preparing for the Olympics in order to execute it, because it requires a lot more ability on the instrument. So your chops have to be totally on fire to do the Cynic stuff correctly, to really execute it. And that's kind of part of the whole situation around that work. But I enjoy that as well. It's just a different side to the things that I do. So yeah, those are the two things. I also wear hats as a composer. I'm working musician in Los Angeles. I've been a session musician, guitar player on and off since the mid 90s. I've scored a lot of films and commercials and, worked in that world as well. So I can do a lot of that stuff, but my heart is with songwriting and just, songs in general and creating unique original music.
Let's talk about these solo releases. What was the history of these songs? Because I understand that even though the music came out just recently,
yeah,
the ideas came many, many years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is true with everything I've ever released, and that even includes Cynic's material. We just never really tell people the history of the stuff, but a lot of what a record becomes for me is often a curated collection of material over what could be, decades of work, and you just kind of handpick things and then finish embryonic ideas that have been in process and see what makes sense for this particular body of work. And so a lot of this material was post Aeon Spoke things that I had unfinished, and there's some newer things as well, but a bunch of it was rooted in that. And I had in the back of my mind this thinking that I wanted to finish this stuff at one point, and knew I wanted to kind of get it done. It was just one of those like lurking bodies of work that just hadn't been realized. And I had a window to do it. I had this period where my bass player was busy with some other things, the other Cynic member, Sean Malone. And so I had this window to kind of buckle down, and I just seized it and thought, I'm gonna get this stuff finished. So there's some songs that go back probably over a decade, and then a handful that are over the past 5 years or so. Yeah, so this stuff is really it has some history, and it's so there's like a arc to it and a story that came together that I'm not really telling anybody what it is literally, but there is an underlying thing that kind of came to it and became a part of this whole collection, and then I just saw what was happening and broke up. I had recorded over 20 songs and then saw this through line with about 15 of them, and then all this stuff happened with numerology and a curious bunch of synchronicities that pointed to what this thing was telling me, what it was doing. You know, these processes inform themselves as a result of showing up. It doesn't really feel like you have anything to do with it at some point, and that's what happened with this. I just kind of went for the ride and ended up with these 15 songs. I mean, I'm actually going to probably release some of the others later. And then, so that's the history of it. And then all these other little components became part of the work, which we can get into. I don't know if I answered your question correctly, but
Yeah, absolutely.
okay.
So the first part of what is planned to be a trilogy, Mythical, came out in May. The second part, Human, came out last week. And there's going to be a third part called Vessel, correct?
Yeah.
Conceptually, why did you decide to separate these songs into 3 parts?
It just, again, it was one of those things that just made sense. I mean, there's numerous reasons, actually. I think practical purposes was the day and age we're in. There's just so much information out there, and there's so much stuff we're absorbing that I thought small doses of this would kind of be a helpful way to share it with people versus just handing them 15 or 20 songs and having people go through that. It just felt, and also there was this underlying conceptual idea that broke up into 3 sets of 5s, basically 3 5-song kind of pieces. And that's when I started to realize, like, and then I had the title and I started to kind of see what was happening, and it just made sense that these were like 3 mini albums that had their own little self-contained kind of thing happening versus trying to do it all in one. So it just made more sense to break it up. And I just kind of went with it. I really, again, these are things I was just kind of in the process and informed by the process, and we don't really know where these ideas come from. They just they organically happen, and I was just kind of following the muse.
Now, to clarify, was the music all recorded and released separately, or was it also recorded separately in terms of the 3 releases?
They were all recorded at the same time, other than there's a few numbers on there that have some original demo vocal performances that go further back. But like 98% of it was recorded in my apartment, in my little, I have a little half closet room, converted studio space in my apartment in Los Angeles, and I did everything right there. So the pieces, the idea of what was happening, I was just recording a body of work, and actually I kept sending this stuff to this mixer, Warren Riker, who worked on it with me, and kept sending him things, and he would work on it and encourage me and say, you've got things happening, this is developing, and he was really encouraging me to keep going. So it was a process, and I didn't even know what was happening in terms of what was going to happen with it, what the story was, what was underneath it all. I just kind of hurled myself into that whole situation, and then it started to figure itself out along the way.
When night is almost done and sunrise grows so near that we can touch the spaces and wonder we could count for that old faded midnight hour. Replaces
One of the elements in these solo releases that separates it from your other work is the use of isochronic tones.
Yeah.
Explain what isochronic tones are, how you discovered them, and why you decided to implement it in your music.
Well, it's funny. I had been a fan of binaural beats for many years. I actually had used them in an album I did for this like astrology dude who made a meditation CD probably a decade ago. And I had made this like whole guided meditation, ambient new age piece of music, and I included binaural beats. I got really kind of into it. And then I kind of forgot about them for a while. I just was trying to do something interesting for that particular project. And I had kind of, somehow it came back into my consciousness. I downloaded some apps. And there's a company called Bazillion that makes, I think they're the best one out there actually, that makes this app, what's it called? Brainwave, actually. They have like all these binaural programs that you can experiment with, and they're really interesting in that you can set what you want it for. I mean, it's funny. It'll be like morning espresso, hangover helper, energy before exercise, depression, like, I mean, really specific stuff. And it's just these two frequencies that come in both ears. And I just started to use the apps and as an experiment, and did it for steadily, probably every day for a good year or two. And I found that they were really working. And this was just my own experiments. And then I did more research and got kind of geeked out on it all, and then started discovering this whole thing called isochronic tones, which is like a post-binaural beat thing that you don't need a pair of headphones, although they totally work with headphones. It's not the two frequencies, the variable frequencies in each ear where you're, binaural beats, to quickly explain what happens is there's a frequency in each ear. Each frequency represents a certain brainwave state. So like, let's just say beta, right? So there'll be, 432 in your right ear and 434 in your left ear, and your brain will make up for the difference and create 433. And that 433 is very specific to that emotional thing that you're using it for, or energetic or whatever. It's almost like a prescription, and so the difference with isochronic tones is that it doesn't need the two waves. It actually does it all in one. It's almost like a mono thing. And I started to do more research on it, and I started to listen to Stéphane Pigeon's work. I don't know if you're hip to mynoise.net, but he's an audio genius who has been doing this incredible work. He goes around, he travels the world recording environments, and he builds these players that have 10 sliders. And on these sliders are different aspects of a certain sound. It can be it's so many different things, but you basically mix your own track essentially, and they all have this certain tonality to them. It's like a signature EQ. He's like a genius engineer, audio guy. And I was obsessed with his site and his isochronic stuff. And he had a thing where you can say, build your own isochronic tones. And I started to experiment with it. And I started to experiment with them on my record. At first, I thought I'd use binaural beats. And then I thought, oh, I can make my own isochronic tones. And I found that the player he had just wasn't equipped for the type level of detail I was trying to incorporate with my work. So I reached out to him and said, I need some help. I'm trying to get this to match tempo and key signature. And he's like, just send me some of your work. Let me see what you're doing. And he was really immediately receptive, which was awesome. And he dug what I was doing. It was just like, I love this. I love these songs. Let me scratch your back and I'll scratch yours. Matt, why don't you do something for me and I'll create custom tones for your record. And that was just like a dream scenario because huge fan of this man's genius. Just to have him involved was like an honor. So he proceeded I started sending him things. He would create these custom tones. And then I created this custom player for him called Transdimensional Traveler, which is on his website now, which was like a 10-track guitar, kind of almost like something you'd hear on an early Pink Floyd record, but a little bit more chill and kind of new agey, but really interesting. Yeah, and Stéphane educated me a lot on how to work with the tones, how to use them, how they would be implemented in the context of this music, the role they would play, and they essentially became another instrument on these records. And I think what really made it all come together for me with this conceptually was that it suddenly became an offering. It wasn't just this collection of really intimate acoustic music with these seemingly highly personal songs. Now it was like actually something that could help people as a kind of new type of medicinal therapy, auditory, medicinal, kind of sonic therapy. And I was like, wow, this has nothing to do with me anymore. This is the best kind of art. It's like it can help people, they can work with this. They can use this to alleviate depression, to help them sleep. I mean, so I got into all that stuff and I just suddenly felt like it just served a purpose and it all made sense. And that was when it became almost the glue for the Mythical Human Vessel trilogy. It was like this was that ingredient that just made it all come together. Although obviously when you hear it, you're just hearing a bunch of songs and the tones aren't as as literal as you'd think. But that's why I made that 6-track on each record. There's just a pure tones track that's to be used, in a medicinal way, as almost like a guided self-hypnosis practice. That's really it. It's been an incredible journey, actually, and Stéphane and I are still in contact, but he really helped take this into another dimension, which I'm truly grateful for.
So we should talk about the isochronic tones in terms of their reputed therapeutic value, which is, so I'm gonna quote Stéphane Pigeon here. These tones are designed in such a way that the listener's brain will subtly connect to its own personal resonant frequency within the spectrum. As a result, the audience achieves a higher emotional connection to the music and its meaning. So people will be able to hear these songs on the podcast, and it sounds like, as you described it, acoustic singer-songwriter stuff with an added noise element. And so that noise element is actually these isochronic tones, right?
Yeah.
And the effect is said to be that they can elevate the body's serotonin levels and actually cause a physical...
Yeah, there's a psychophysical component to it. And essentially what he's saying when he said that is that because he designed these particular tones on the record to be full spectrum, like they cover the entire audio spectrum. I mean, to the point where if you played this album on like a speaker that has like ridiculous subwoofers kind of thing, like a massive PA system that has massive low end, it would rumble the stage. Like it has like unbelievable, and then the highest stuff that like a dog would, start running or something. It's like it covers this, inaudible level of spectrum, and then the spectrum, the realm that we can actually hear. And he designed it that way so that when you listen, what's happening is your brain is naturally kind of seeking a resonant frequency as it's connecting to the song. Like obviously there's the track on each of them that has nothing to do, it is the song's tones, but without the music on it. And that's used in a different way. But the ones that are embedded in the music are, it's designed in a sense that people, whether they realize it or not, they're hearing the music, they're having whatever emotional connection they're having to it if they are. And then there's this subtle kind of almost like hypnotic brainwave thing that's basically helping them connect to it on another level by sending out a certain frequency that kind of attunes their brain to whatever their brain is resonating with. It kind of like it goes, it's almost like two signals kind of matching, and it'll create this deeper kind of connection, almost like, and it's interesting because I think great songs, great music does this already, but you're kind of bringing in this almost physical component like this where it actually could affect your body. And I even think great songs will affect your body regardless. And there's a biological component to all this. It's like your biography becomes your biology, and so it's all connected. But it's like the tones become this added little secret medicine that works on a very subtle level, and it'll affect everybody differently. And it's so I'm not like trying to tell anybody that they have to it's like almost like a voodoo or witchcraft component to it. It's not about trying to convince anybody of anything. And I actually thought the tones, that in the way that they sweep and have this undulating quality, and they kind of move around, especially if you listen to the 6-track of each record with headphones. He just pans them in a way where you can feel them in the back of your head, in front of you. They just have this 360 interesting thing going on. And it became this almost like voice from the cosmos or something, some kind of, otherworldly element that I thought was an interesting contrast as well, because everything is so earthy and grounded. It's just like acoustic guitar, human voice, but it's pretty raw. Everything's so of the earth, and then you've got this almost like ethereal kind of thing that's sweeping through it all. It really, there's so many layers to what I'm saying that I don't even want to get into the details of that are part of the story, but you get what I'm saying. I love the contrast, almost like the future primitive kind of thing.
Will you please tell me something real? I haven't got the strength to say it clear. Did you wave your wings through the crowd, or bursting meaning out? Will you please show me something real? I haven't got the strength to conceal. Did you become a tree that I could hold, shedding leaves that never found a home?
It's interesting because in the last couple of months I spoke to a couple of musicians who spoke about the manner in which music is magic, or music is like magic, in the sense that it can it's something ethereal that can manifest itself physically in the material world. And this is almost literally that. These are tones that cause a physical reaction. As you were speaking, I mean, I know you mentioned voodoo facetiously, but a lot of this does sound like what heavy metal musicians were accused of 30 years ago with subliminal messaging and backmasking and stuff like that. Are you worried at all that someone with ill intentions might accuse you of embedding something similar in your music?
Yeah, I mean, having a roots in having played in a band called Death, it's like I can do no wrong at this point, and I'll take the press. But yeah, I'm sure there'll be all kinds of. There's a whole school of people that just jump to pseudoscience with anything they don't understand, and that's any new technologies. And they, the guy that's even like, I'm really into orgone making, which is using organic and inorganic materials encased in resin. The guy that created that is a scientist named Wilhelm Reich, who came to the U.S. He fled Nazi Germany, I think in the 30s. He went to New York, was this Tesla-like scientist who basically, figured out free energy. And he incredible story, incredible life. He died in prison. The FDA put him in prison and he was poisoned. I mean, it's like, I realize, and like people are just coming to the things that he was like talking about. I mean, he was so ahead. And so I always feel like, yeah, of course there's going to be people ripping on this. And I can only imagine the things that Stéphane has dealt with. But what I guess what I'm saying is, like in the end, nobody knows how it's done. It's like, I can't remember who said that like, I just thought about this again recently because I had mentioned it to a friend. It was like, understanding a tool doesn't explain the magic of creation. It's like, it doesn't, like there's this always secret ingredient to art and to creating things that we can't put our finger on, and that's what makes it cool. That's why we're doing it, I think, right? It's it goes beyond logic and explanation, but yeah, I'm sure I'm gonna get, I've already had tons of people say that's all bullshit, it doesn't work, and again, it's we're co-creators.
I think that's the best case scenario, right? If somebody says, well, this is all hokum, this is all pseudoscience. I think the worst case scenario is somebody saying, well, I went into a shopping mall with a gun because I heard this thing on a record. Like that's
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, you're right. Actually, that's so it is one of those things where I would hope for it, but yeah, who knows? It's funny. I'm glad you're asking about it though, because it's like one of those things where I think it is for me, it's a big part of it. Obviously, it is a songwriting focused record, and the songs, it begins and ends with the songs, but the tones did become a big part of this story and this whole piece, and they really are substantial in my mind, but you have to be patient with them and you have to work with them, and that's where I think it's going to weed out a lot of people, because it takes a curious person to spend some time with these kinds of new technologies and experimental things like this,
So, do you have any interest in playing this material live?
Oh yeah, I
Maybe
played some
tones.
shows, and I'm still planning shows. And my plan now, I was going to start actively touring this year, and then I just thought, because I'm in the throes of doing this Cynic album, I thought, let me get this record finished, not necessarily like mixed or whatever, but just the recording and the pieces, and switch gears when Vessel comes out, and focus on touring and really getting into the heavy promotional cycle once the 3 pieces are out. And because actually once Vessel comes out, which is probably going to be around late February or March, they're going to be also packaged as like a box set kind of thing. It'll be released as one bigger piece. And I think the timing will be perfect to just put it out then. I mean, to tour then. And so I'm looking at starting really March. I actually just booked a festival in Holland in the third week of March, and I'm building a European tour around that. And then I'm going to try and do the US. And then I'm talking about Asia, India, Latin America. There's going to be like extensive touring. And the reality is the more time to set all that up, the better. So that's the plan. And there's a bigger story here, actually, which involves this whole show ending up in this dome kind of environment, or an immersive reality environment that kind of gets into the story. And it's more of a experiential performance art kind of thing that's intimate and different versus like me playing some rock club, busting out these songs. Like I'm trying to, the end result will be something quite elaborate and interesting, but it's going to take a little bit to get there.
You released this material by yourself. Why did you end up going the self-release route?
Well, it's funny. I actually decided on that because of my friend Pliny, who's a guitar player. I don't know if you're hip to him. He's an instrumental guitarist who actually, I met him because he opened for Cynic in Japan when we played in Japan in 2015. I wasn't sure. I was thinking I would shop it to labels. I was going to kind of exploring all the alternatives, and Pliny, who had self-released a series of records, just said you should try it. You've never done this before. There was something appealing about it, having always been in the threshold of record companies and people just being involved with all that stuff. And I will say, I mean, it's been an incredible learning curve and a tremendous amount of work, because you're just never, you're just not only giving birth to this thing, but you now have to promote it and do all the legwork. You're wearing multiple hats. So I'm learning a lot. I'm excited about it, and I'm just kind of going with the flow. My friend advised me to do it, and I'm happy I did, because it is somewhat liberating to just be able to completely steer the ship without other voices telling you what it should look like or what you should do with it. You know what I mean? So it's been interesting, and it's just, again, it's the idea of like you have to just work a little harder because you're taking it all on, but I don't mind doing that. So yeah, really Pliny was the voice that advised me to go for it and self-release, and it's through a company, essentially, this company called AWOL, but they're not a record company per se. They're almost like a modern day record company in that they do all your digital distribution, and you do have to actually sign with them, but they don't own your music. There's no commitment in that sense. They're just kind of a platform for the distribution and some promotional help.
Is there a name for your record company? Is it under your own name?
Yeah, it's just under Masvidalian, which is a play on my last name. My last name is Masvidal, so I've always kind of, I actually came up with the IEN added Masvidalian years ago, and first used it with a signature guitar that I have with Strandberg, with a Swedish guitar company. So it was like, just kind of lent itself to that guitar, and then ended up kind of going in other places. And that's just, it's become like an umbrella for a lot of projects now. So I'm kind of, I'm just rolling with it as the name of the company. And I'm actually would consider working with other artists at some point down the line and turning it into something tangible, depending on how things unfold.
Yeah, there are a lot of noise and experimental musicians who work along similar lines as you in terms of, not necessarily the isochronic tones, but using noise and ambient music with their songs. So
yeah,
who knows? You might end up being the roadrunner of ambient experimental noise music.
That would be awesome. I know. I mean, there's so many great artists out there, and I was actually just sending a list of artists I was interested in like touring with, and I'd say at least a third of them were more in that avant-garde ambient kind of range, because even though it's very folky and acousticy in a sense live, especially with the tones and all the things I incorporate, it gets pretty spacious, and it just sounds, it's not like a coffee shop vibe. You know what I mean? It's definitely got a different thing, especially in a live context.
Between elation and despair, a civil war, place all attack. And my solace sings the truth on 1 square foot of the earth. I will cultivate the landscape interconnection, oneself at a time. Feel your body, feel your breath, hold your gaze on 1 square foot of the earth. Feel your body, feel your breath, hold your gaze on 1 square global humanoids unraveling the web. Our data has no limit now. The organic being spread. We taste the revolution, the wilderness of mind. Let us pact with the earth and awaken our lives.
So let's switch gears and talk about Cynic. What is the status of the band right now?
We've been working on a record. We have a new drummer. You know, Sean Malone, the original bass player, is in the group. It still has always been. And the drummer now is a guy named Matt Lynch out of Atlanta, who's a phenomenal drummer who we've played with once already and then done a lot of recording and working with him. Been working with him virtually online, just sharing files for a while now. And we're in the throes of a new record, essentially. I mean, we're just actually about to kind of take it up a notch because Sean, my bass player, actually just moved to Los Angeles. So we are in it, and we plan to deliver a record sometime next year. I think it's just at this point the focus is just making the record great and finishing it, and then who knows when it'll see the light of day. I maybe the end of next year, maybe early 2021 or end of 2020, but yeah, we're just we're in the throes of a new album.
Now, are there completed songs at this point, or is it all just ideas and riffs going back and forth?
Yeah, we released a song last year called Humanoid. That was like a comeback song, just basically to tell the world that we're still here and that we never left. And then we've since, yeah, we have, I would say, the most of it's written in a sense. It's just the real work comes in trying to finish it. So now's when all the, this is when it gets very real, because when I say written songs, I mean embryonic demos of basic harmony and melody, but to kind of turn that into a Cynic song is a real process, so, but yeah, there's a lot of material floating around, and we're just in the middle of a bunch of things, right now, like between myself, the bass player, and the drummer, and kind of going back and forth on a lot of stuff.
The single that you released at the end of last year, Humanoid, was in a lot of ways a return to the early Cynic style, in the sense that it's faster and quote unquote technical, or maybe the guitar playing is a little bit more involved. Is this a sign of the direction for this upcoming album?
Not necessarily. I think that was just that song. I suspect the album is going to be a combination of, kind of that classic Cynic thing, but with a twist. And then, because we don't want to repeat ourselves, and then there's like this whole other half of the record that's way more experimental, almost more instrumentally based. And I'm going deeper into experiments with the vocoder. Like I'm consciously widening the gap between Masvidal as a solo artist and Cynic as an entity. It's like I don't want there to be these things that, a lot of artists will do that. They have these side projects and they all sound like the same, just with different names, kind of variations on a theme. And I really want to just push Cynic further out and really take us into a new realm. And Malone and I are very much in that headspace of doing something new and still song focused, but like vocally very vocoder kind of heavy and instrumentally driven, still song oriented, but just a new stage of development for the band. So it'll be something new altogether. I think Humanoid was kind of a here we are, and you this feels familiar. It was just one of those tunes that kind of had one of the early ones that came together that just had a certain vibe, but I don't think it necessarily points to the vibe of the album. I mean, there'll be some rockin' tunes for sure, but it's going to kind of be everything.
Very cool. Looking forward to it. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I actually interviewed Jason Gerbel, who was the original Cynic, rhythm guitarist, or one of the original Cynic members.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Recently?
Yeah.
Or?
Recently, yeah. He was I'm based in Malaysia, and he was traveling through Southeast Asia, so a friend of mine put us in touch.
Oh, nice.
And then so we spent a long time going over the history of Cynic and the early days. I'm sure you have a lot of people asking you about those early albums and, working with Chuck and stuff like that. So I don't want to rehash that stuff, but I do want to ask you about the legacy of Cynic and how you see the legacy. Because, I as somebody who writes about music and has a music website, I get a lot of bands sent to me through promos and things like that. And this genre that came out in the wake of Cynic, which people call prog metal or progressive death metal or tech death or all that stuff, really owes its existence to the work that you did with Chuck on the Human album, as well as the first Cynic album, Focus. And so I'm curious how you look at the legacy of those early recordings, and B, how you see these bands that are quite obviously influenced by your work.
So A, how I see the legacy in terms of Cynic itself, and then B, what?
How you feel about these bands that are very much indebted to your work.
Oh, I mean, well, first of all, obviously honored that that there's any love and response and support. I mean, I think like, again, it's the roots of all this stuff. We started very young. I was playing with Death as a teenager. Essentially, I knew him as in my mid-teens, and he was a pen pal. Like I was a fan of Death's demos. And he was somebody who lived 3.5 hours north of where we grew up in Miami. So we became like pen pals, and then eventually phone friends. So it was like, you're just what you're talking about in terms of like that whole thing becoming something. I think it was literally just being fueled by a genuine passion for music and originality. I mean, I remember going through deep phases of obsessively interested in being as original as possible, because even back then there were so many copycats and Slayer and Metallica rip-off bands, and I just thought, why isn't anybody doing their own thing? It was just like all these. So I think that kind of innate desire to push the envelope, to do something new, to expand my horizons, and then I speak on behalf of all of us as a band, because we all kind of had a genuine fervor and interest in expanding and growing and learning, and we started studying jazz, and it just opened our ears and so many things. So it was a really beautiful time, and what was happening in terms of why that, I think, stuff happened in such a unique way was not only the obsession with these other art forms and having such eclectic tastes in music, but in that we were instantly implementing this stuff that we were absorbing into our work. So like, you learn this crazy chord, or voicing for a chord, and you're now making that a riff in the context of extreme metal, so it was like immediately getting real world kind of, like being referenced in a real world way, which is a different way of learning things, because you can immediately kind of see how it translates. And I think that's really part of the magic of the Cynic, was that we were very much kind of in a highly educational learning environment, and immediately putting it into what we were doing as writers, as creators. And the Death stuff, I think it was interesting because that was obviously before Focus. We were in the peak of all that Focusy stuff then, but we hadn't made the record yet. But Chuck was who I had a history with, trusted me enough. I had toured with him before Human, and had been his like cover guy. I toured for Spiritual Healing and even Leprosy, just because he had lost those guitar players, and I helped him out when he had an emergency. But I was dedicated to Cynic, and he ended up, he was really open and interested, I think, to a degree. I mean, Chuck had a very clear vision about what he wanted his sound to be like. He knew his parameters. They were very clear. But he also gave us a lot of freedom. I think Sean in particular, the drummer, he just was able to, I think it was just one of those things where we were able to we just slipped right in there, added some decorative qualities and gave it a twist, and it made it new. And it's exactly what Chuck needed, actually, to expand. Because I think it's a lot of artists, especially in extreme music, they come to this point where they realize, how much more brutal can you get? It's like it's the brutality factor kind of loses its luster, and you start thinking, and a lot of those extreme metal bands ended up getting more technical. It was like more musical in order to push the envelope. And that's what Chuck did. He just decided, his origins were very punk in a way, Scream Bloody Gore and horror fascination and Leprosy, and it was all about brutality and rebellion. And then it shifted into being more musical and having something to say, writing more psychological lyrics. And I think that's really what gave Death some legs, because ultimately, there's a trajectory there with his work that made it interesting as a body of work. And he was pretty prolific considering how young he died. Yeah, so Cynic was, kind of, we just went into our space post all the Death stuff. We actually had just gotten off a Death tour and we're supposed to make the Cynic record. And then that hurricane hit, which was this curious blessing in disguise, because in that year we got to get better at our instruments. And I felt like, as a lyricist and as a person that was kind of in that mode with Cynic, trying to kind of figure out what it was saying on multiple, visually and lyrically, I kind of really stepped into that on a whole other level. Like I saw it all, and I had leanings and ideas, but it was that year, I think after 92 or something, where I got it. I was like, okay, I see what this is. And including the vocoder, all that stuff just happened right after that hurricane. So it was really kind of awesome, because magically I felt like Cynic had this voice, lyrically, aesthetically, and then musically what the four of us were doing was its own organism as well. So it kind of all came together in a way that you really can't put your finger on, in the way that art, again, happens. Just, it was a time and a place, never to happen again. And it was, but you hear that record and it's just all that, what was so all over the place, or seemingly all over the place at the time, for us made perfect sense, and eventually people, I think, heard that and thought, wow, this actually has a lot of continuity and sounds intentional, and it's not just random. But yeah, that was really cool. And so it was nice, because I will say this, to have a first record that you don't completely hate and regret, because a lot of artists have that, where they look back at their body of work and they're like, oh my God, that first album. I kind of feel that way a little bit with some of the demos. Like, I'm horrified when I hear them, because I just hear, it's like sketches, they just feel like ideas that aren't realized. They're so raw. I didn't know who I was, just searching for a sound. I'm like, I just didn't have a real hold of songwriting, in a sense, but it's okay. I think it's interesting for people to hear the process, or to kind of look at that and see how far along you've come. But we were very opposed to releasing those demos for a long time, I will say that. And then the legacy, I mean, how fortunate. I mean, it's like, there's a quote from Robert Venosa. He says, the duty of an artist really is to inspire other artists. And that really stuck with me. It was like, if there's one thing you can do, if you can leave one thing behind, and that is to make more artists in the world, to make more people interested in creating more art, then you've done your job. I mean, because that's the coolest thing ever. Just to perpetuate art, to perpetuate people making things. I mean, that's pretty damn cool, because we need more of that in this world, So it's cool that it did do that, and it became that, and that people are carrying on and doing their own, versions of it now. I mean, it's unbelievable how the scene's evolved, and who would have thought there'd be like, folk black metal. I mean, it's unbelievable. Like, do you know what I mean? It's like, it's crazy. There's so many subgenres of subgenres. It's awesome. So I'm fascinated with how the expansion, it's really encouraging, actually, that it's not all about brutalness and heaviness, and it's more about artistry and experimentation and originality and having something to say. I mean, that's the coolest part.
is my witness.
I would like to talk a little bit about yoga and meditation and the way it may tie into your music, because I understand that you are an avid yoga practitioner and practice meditation as well.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
So obviously with the solo material that you're doing that has these therapeutic and meditative qualities to the isochronic tones, there's an instant connection to meditation. But would you say that your interest in yoga also bleeds into the other music that you make, specifically with Cynic?
You're saying beyond Cynic, or?
No, with Cynic in particular.
Well, I mean, especially Cynic. I mean, that's where it all started. I mean, look at Focus, it's a bunch of guided meditations and spiritual hymns and looks at, observations on the spiritual path. I mean, that's really the origins of all that stuff, in terms of integrated into music. And the artwork, I mean, Venosa, I mean, all of that was all rooted in those practices. At the time of Cynic, I was more of a Hindu practitioner, and I was interested in Hinduism more than anything. I got obsessed with the Bhagavad Gita and Mahabharata. I was like in that world. I remember just worshiping Ralph Waldo Emerson. I still worship him, and kind of found out that he read the Gita. So it led to all these things that got me immersed in Hindu teaching, and then my late 20s hit, and I just discovered the Buddhist psychology, and a particular teacher named Chogyam Trungpa, a Mahayana teacher who's not with us now, but incredible teacher who wrote these amazing books and has this incredible body of work, and I just was split open. I just suddenly absorbed all of that and went deep down the path of Buddhism. And I would say that's my practice. I took my vows and everything, and particularly Tibetan Buddhism, Mahayana tradition, Lama Yeshe and Chogyam Trungpa. And so all that stuff, I mean, I just, Buddhism is non-theistic, right? So there's no God language. It's about becoming your own therapist. It's about working with your mind. So there's no, I know there's traditional forms of Buddhism, especially you see that in China. There's so many sects, but a lot of what's happened with the Western Buddhism that's come into the States and come through a lot of these Tibetan teachers, for example, it's really just begins and ends with a meditation practice and getting to know your mind and learning habitual patterns and kind of truly knowing what freedom is, so that you're not just governed by this stuff that you've been programmed from perhaps your formative years that's unconsciously ruled your life. It's just trying to have some freedom and sense of knowing who you are. And then obviously that's the roots of it. And then it goes way deeper into transcendent things and realms that are just unbelievable. Yeah, so I just got into all that stuff, I'm just trying to figure out who the hell I am as someone who suffered from major depression, a lot of his life, who came from a dysfunctional family, who's experienced a lot of hardship, who's terrified of death, and because of that wanted to be around it, in terms of working with the dying. I mean, there were so many things I was trying to kind of navigate, and still am. And I found Buddhism became a path to look and some sense of structure, because really, the saying, if you see the Buddha on the road, kill him. It's like, I don't even want to get into that whole thing of claiming to be Buddhist. It's more of just, I'm just trying to understand the nature of reality, and it's, this was some of these people that have explained what they saw. It became interesting to me. Also, psychedelics have opened a lot of doors, experimenting with all that stuff. But yeah, just it's really a way of life, and meditation is something I do every day and constantly, I do retreats. I'm just, I'm a student, man, just taking it one breath at a time. It's really all I can do, in all of this whole situation that we're in, what the hell are we doing here? It's kind of one of those things,
So this is a an apology in the form of a question. How do you feel about Cynic being referred to as yoga metal? Or even the term yoga metal?
That sounds really groovy.
Okay. I'm glad to hear you say that because I've been calling Cynic yoga metal since Trace Air came out.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's funny because during Trace Air, on that tour in particular, I started having the audience do certain yoga stretches, in between songs, because a lot of our audience is so like nerdy, and not like there isn't a real aggro-y mosh pit, more just like nerdy people just like watching us and looking at our hands and analyzing. And I remember thinking, people need to stretch. And I did feel like it became like this yoga metal thing, and it's very true in a sense. I mean, that's definitely part of it.
Excellent. So before I let you go, tell me what you have planned next.
Well, other than like being in the midst of this new Cynic album, which is happening, with Sean Malone, who's here now. I'm obviously planning these tours for the acoustic records. I'm making art. I'm making these things called Organite. So I do that as well, and I'm always just in process. But I suspect we've got the third album from this trilogy coming out in March. We've got a Cynic record that will be delivered at least next year, and then possibly coming out the end of next year, if not early 2021. And then there's going to be a lot of touring of this acoustic stuff until then. And, there'll be other adventures, but that's kind of really the gist of at least the next year for me. It's pretty mapped out.
Please tell people how they can get in touch with you and how they can find your music.
Yeah. So you can basically, in terms of getting a hold of me, Masvidalian@gmail is my main email address. I have obviously Instagram as Paul Masvidal. I have Facebook as Paul Masvidal, and you can DM me on those places as well. And then there's Mythical Human Vessel, or actually now that mythicalhumanvessel.com is all Masvidalian.com forwards to mythicalhumanvessel.com, because I'm creating a bigger site eventually. But just Masvidalian.com is a good website for stuff. And please check out the music and experiment with the isochronic tones and let me know what your results are.
The music itself is available at Bandcamp at masvidal.bandcamp.com. And I'm assuming you're on all the other streaming services as well, right?
Totally. Yep. Well, I think,
Very cool.
Spotify, iTunes, all that stuff. Yep.
And this the signature guitar that you put out, is that commercially available? Can people buy that?
Yeah. It's made by Strandberg Guitars, and the Cosmo, Masvidalian Cosmo, is out there now. And I from what I understood, actually, it's just now Guitar Center's doing it, which makes it kind of reach. I guess that's more of a United States thing, but I know that they're made actually in Indonesia. So I wonder where I don't know where shipping comes from, but yeah, it's you just go to strandberg.com or just Google Masvidalian Cosmo Strandberg or Paul Masvidal signature guitar or something, and you'll find out all kinds of, it's kind of available through numerous outlets depending on where you live, I think. It's a beautiful instrument, I will say that. You can't go wrong with it, but it's one of those things that it's more of a boutique instrument, that it's priced, it's not for everybody in terms of the price, but it's worth it if you have the resources, because it's quite beautiful and sounds amazing.
Very cool. Is there anything else you want to say?
That's it. I guess just thank you, Adrian, for the call and for the interesting podcast, and keep doing great work.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you.